The next example that we are going to look at in section 1.2 is we are going to look at coding categorical data with numbers. So coded data basically means we're turning word labels into number labels. So we're going to use numbers to record categorical data. Generally the number 1 means yes to the question being implied by the column heading, and the number 0 means no to the implied question. And the reason we do this is, thinking about this, we're talking about a math class, so we want to think about numbers. So sometimes being able to turn our different word labels into different number labels gives us a different way to analyze or think about our data. So in example 4, consider the following data for newborn birth weights. Use the given non-coded data to create a new coded data set. Right, so looking at this table, we're given a bunch of weights, we are given genders, and we are given the smoking status of the mother. Right, so we're going to leave weight as it is, and we're going to start by coding our gender. And now we could go either way. We could label this heading as either male or female, it doesn't really matter. I am going to pick female. Right, so in this case, a female, if we use that as the heading, that means that a 1 is going to be yes. So the weight is going to come from a female baby, a newborn. And then if we put a 0, that's going to be no. So that means it's going to come from a male. So our first weight, 7.69, is from a male. That's a no. So that's a 0. The next one is also male, also a 0. Female means 1, another 1, another 1, and the last one is male. Right, then the last column, smoking status of mother. So we're going to say that they are a smoker. Right, so a smoker is going to get a 1, a non-smoker is going to get a 0. So we have a 0 for this first one for a non-smoker, a 1 for the mother that is smoking, 0, 0, 1, and 0. So what we've done is we've taken that second and third column, and instead of thinking about these as labels, we're looking at these as numbers. Again, the reason is sometimes it makes it easier to generate some sort of different graph or numerical information as we're looking at some data. The other reason that we use coded data is sometimes it might make it easier to store our data in different ways. Right? So we have a couple of different ways of storing our data. Right? When we are dealing with stacked data, right, each row represents one individual. And then if we have unstacked data, right, each column represents a variable. So do we have each row represents one individual, or each column represents a variable? And this kind of is a confusing definition until we actually kind of see it in practice, which we're going to do so in our next example that we're going to look at. All right, so these tables show the difference between unstacked and stacked data. Okay, so in our unstacked data, each of these values represents a different person, right? So each column represents a variable, and each different data value represents a different person. Where in our stacked data, right, stacked data means each row represents one individual. Right. Here, each entry represents an individual because each column represents a variable. So again, depending on the type of analysis that we're looking at, we may want unstacked data, we may want stacked data. Right? It's really kind of depend as we continue to go through different examples throughout this semester. This isn't something huge that we're going to talk about after we get out of this section, but it is worth mentioning. So kind of keep this in mind, keep the idea of coded data in mind. A lot of this first chapter, again, we're thinking about vocabulary, things that are going to show up a lot of different places. The unstacked versus stacked data is not necessarily one of those things, but we don't want to leave it out completely. So we do talk about it just a little bit. All right, so let's look at one last example, kind of using this idea of coded data, uncoded data, stacked data, unstacked data, and kind of put all of this together for this section. So using a sensor worn around her wrist, Safa recorded the amount of sleep she got on several nights. She also recorded whether it was a weekend or a weeknight. For the weekends, she recorded in hours 8.1 and 8.3 hours. For the weeknight, she recorded 7.9, 6.5, 8.2, 7.0, 7.3. Write these data in both stacked and unstacked format. So when we're looking at our unstacked format, that means that each different number that we see is going to represent a different data value. So we're going to separate this into weekend and weeknight. Okay, so our values for weekend, 8.1 hours, 8.3 hours. For weeknights, we have 7.9, 6.5, 8.2, that should be 7.0, lost my decimal point there, and then 7.3. If we're doing stacked data, then each different day is going to be represented by a different line. So we're going to make a list with time, and then we're also going to code this. So we're going to say whether or not it is the weekend. Right? So this data is also going to be coded. All right, so our times, we're going to list these, each individual value in a different row. 8.1, 8.3, 7.9, 6.5, 8.2, 7.0, 7.3. Right, since we labeled this weekend, we're going to use a 1 for a yes to the weekend and a 0 for a no to the weekend, which would be a weeknight. So these first two values are weekends. Those are yeses, so those are 1s. These other values are weeknights, so they're going to be 0s. So the idea kind of as we're going through the last few examples in the section is just practicing using our different data, whether or not it's coded, stacked, unstacked, right? Because depending on the type of problem that we're looking at, we may want to explore data from different avenues. And being able to kind of go back and forth between these different things is definitely going to be something that we're going to want to be comfortable with. Whether or not we use the word stacked and unstacked as we go forward, probably not necessarily going to be the case, but the idea of populations and samples and categorical and numerical variables, those things are definitely going to show up as we start to go through the next few chapters.